My cousin had an affair with my wife, so I managed to get him to confess while he was drunk, and then sent the video to our family. Before my wife and I became romantically involved, we had always been family friends. Her mother and my mom were close friends, and their visits to our house were frequent when she was a child. As kids, my wife and I didn't get along well because I often teased her. However, as we grew older, things changed. Our frequent interactions led me to fall in love with her, and after a few months, we started dating. My wife has told me that I was her first real love, and that her previous relationships in college were just her testing the waters. When we decided to share our relationship with our families, they were supportive since she was already well known to them. But before we got married, we had a serious argument that nearly led to a breakup. I have a cousin who has been my rival since childhood. He is my maternal cousin, a few years older than me. My mom's younger sister had him when she was 16, while my mom waited until she was 21 to have me with my dad. For reasons I can't fully explain, my cousin and I were always at odds, constantly fighting or competing for something. Despite our mother's attempts to make us get along, we never seemed to find common ground. He was also a subtle bully, constantly picking on me, though he would always appear well-behaved around our parents and other adults. What nearly led to the breakup between my wife and me was a shocking incident at a family reunion where I caught her making out with my cousin. I was furious. She was well aware of our rivalry, yet she didn't push him away when he made advances. She allowed him to kiss her, which almost tore our relationship apart. It took me about 3 months to reconcile with her, and that was only after I considered her perspective and realized she was heavily influenced by alcohol. Reflecting on it now, I often wonder if I should have ended things back then. Perhaps it would have spared me years of pain. After we married, we moved to another state for work, visiting our hometown only during holidays and special occasions. We were content with our simple life, and we both agreed that children were not on the agenda yet, so we never discussed them. I made every effort to be a supportive husband, providing financial, emotional, and spiritual support, and fulfilling all the roles she needed me to. Beyond our families, we had each other. While I was the one who only visited our parents on special occasions or when invited, my wife made it a point to visit our hometown at least twice a month. Her mother was very ill, and as her only child, she felt the need to spend time with her. During some of these weekends, she would stay overnight and return on Sunday evenings, ensuring she could spend time with both her mother and my family. However, during all her visits, she never mentioned seeing any of my old friends or hers. She always claimed the only people she saw were our families, which struck me as odd given that she grew up in the same town with a dozen friends who still lived there. For almost a year, my wife continued to visit our hometown twice a month, even after her mother recovered from her illness. She said she felt drawn to the town and enjoyed reconnecting with everyone to stay connected with our family. At the time, I should have been suspicious, but I trusted her completely and never imagined she would betray me. By then, we had been married for 2 years, and our bond had grown stronger. 2 months before Christmas, my parents decided to renew their wedding vows after 30 years of marriage, hoping to rekindle their romance. As expected, my wife and I attended the celebration, arriving a day early to help with preparations. The day after the party, my wife suggested we spend an extra day with our families as it had been a while since I'd visited. I agreed, and we stayed for the small family after-party. During the after-party, my cousin, my longtime rival and the favored child of the family, was there too. Knowing I would be staying, I invited some of my old friends to join me for a night of drinking. As we all gathered to drink and chat about various trivial matters, my cousin, who had consumed quite a bit, began to make a scene. My cousin had always been a braggart, especially around me. It seemed like he constantly wanted everyone, especially me, to know he was doing better than I was, despite being born out of wedlock. When he started making a scene, my friend and I were laughing loudly about an old memory. My cousin, drawn to our noise, shifted his attention to us. Instead of continuing with his antics, he directed his rant at me, insulting my marriage. When I didn't respond, he grew angrier and started telling everyone how he had been sleeping with my wife. At first, I thought he was just trying to get a rise out of me, but when he began describing how she had visited our hometown on weekends and the fun they had together, I realized he was telling the truth. My only reaction was to record him, so I took out my phone and started recording as he boasted about his affair. He even went so far as to say he had slept with my wife on purpose to prove he could have anything I had. I was devastated and couldn't hide my embarrassment. When it seemed his bragging would never stop, I had no choice but to leave. Upon reaching my parents' house, I found my wife talking with them. I started yelling at her. Before leaving the party, I had already sent the video to her so she would know I was aware of her affair. When she saw it, she told me not to believe anything my cousin said because he was drunk. But I was convinced he wouldn't have said those things if they weren't true. His focus on my wife wasn't just drunken rambling. I was so furious that I confronted her in front of my parents. After a lot of yelling, she finally broke down in tears and admitted that there had been a couple of occasions when she had mistakenly slept with my cousin, the one person she knew I despised the most. My parents intervened, deeply disappointed by my wife's betrayal. Her mother, also present, was equally disheartened and left the house in shame. I had shared the recording of my drunk cousin on our WhatsApp family group chat, and it became clear to everyone that he wasn't the upstanding person they had believed him to be. That night, I couldn't bear the shame and embarrassment, so I drove to a nearby motel and didn't sleep at home. My parents and wife called me throughout the night, but I didn't answer any of their calls. The next day, I texted my mom to let her know I was returning to the town where I lived, leaving my wife behind. She came home later that evening, but I had already packed my belongings and left the house for her. When she called me that evening, asking where I was, I told her it was over and that my lawyer would be in touch. I wasn't interested in hearing her explanation, so I blocked her number and unfollowed her on all our mutual social media platforms. The divorce was challenging, but I went through with it. Now we are officially divorced and my family's view of her has changed. My mom and her mom remain friends, but she is no longer welcome in our home. I've learned my lesson, and moving forward, I won't ignore red flags in any future relationships. A leopard never changes its spots. It's been 3 years and that night still haunts me, often creeping into my dreams. As for my cousin, there's no chance of any reconciliation. He's no better than an animal. The dynamic within my family has changed significantly since everyone saw him boasting in that video, and I'm glad they now treat him with the disdain he deserves. Now, on to the next story. Story 2. Mill leaves me with a ridiculous core list before going on vacation, so I burn it and make a long overdue call that changes everything. I am a 29-year-old woman married to my husband, who is 32. About a year ago, he took up a project in Europe and is expected to stay there for 3 more years. So he's been away and I've been at home with our 3-year-old son. Initially, we were supposed to move with him, but my mother-in-law insisted he leave us behind and go alone. My mother-in-law believed it wouldn't be good for our son to move so frequently, spending 3 years here, then the next 3 in Europe, and back again. After much deliberation, my husband and I agreed that she had a point, so I stayed behind with our son. She also persuaded me to move in with her, suggesting we all live together as a family, and I agreed. This arrangement meant I wouldn't have to pay for daycare or a nanny since my mother-in-law would take care of my son while I worked. It seemed like a win-win situation, and I had always been on good terms with my in-laws, so I didn't see anything unusual about it. A year ago, I moved in with my in-laws a couple of weeks after my husband left for Europe. The first few weeks were pleasant, but gradually my mother-in-law's behavior started to change. She began making me do all the household chores, cooking, cleaning, laundry, and more, because she claimed they were too old. I didn't notice it at first, but by the time I did, it was too late. She started treating me like a housemaid, and if I ever mentioned that I was tired, she would taunt me about being raised to be lazy and spoiled. We had many arguments, but my mother-in-law would often apologize with tears, and I would end up forgiving her each time. Whenever my husband visited, the entire family would put on their best behavior, knowing they couldn't mistreat me with him around. They depended on him for financial support since they don't earn enough on their own. My father-in-law and mother-in-law are retired, and my sister-in-law is in college, so my husband and I are the sole earners in the family. My own parents are no longer around. My dad passed away when I was 10, and my mom died 6 years ago. If they were still here, I would have moved out immediately to stay with them instead of enduring this situation, but I felt trapped. I couldn't tell my husband about the way his parents were treating me because I was afraid of what might happen next. It sounds irrational given that I'm an adult working woman, and one call to my husband could have resolved everything, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. After nearly a year of being mistreated by my in-laws, I still liked them, as they had been kind to me for a long time before this mistreatment started. I kept hoping that they would eventually return to treating me well, but that never happened. 3 days ago, I finally realized that my in-laws were never going to change. All their apologies were just a facade to keep me quiet and ensure I didn't tell my husband anything. My in-laws had a tradition of going on holiday for a week or so every year, and since I started dating my husband, I was always included in those trips. This year, since my husband couldn't make it, I decided to stay back and get some much-needed time away from them. I had heard my mother-in-law and father-in-law planning their trip for a week from then, but they hadn't asked me anything, so I planned to tell them that I wanted to stay behind whenever they brought it up. A few days ago, my mother-in-law finally mentioned it. Before I could even express my decision, she handed me a list of chores that needed to be completed by the time they returned. I was dumbstruck, barely listening to her as she explained that she expected me to do all this while they were on vacation. I was still processing her request when I read, "Clean both floors." I lost it. I screamed at her for 10 minutes, calling her a disgustingly entitled old hag, and told her I wasn't going to do any of it. In a fit of rage, I grabbed the list, stormed into the kitchen, and set it on fire while she tried to argue with me. Then I did what I should have done a long time ago. I grabbed my phone and made the long overdue call to my husband. Right in front of my mother-in-law, I told him everything I had been holding back for so long. My mother-in-law was screaming in the background, denying everything, making the call extremely chaotic, but my husband managed to calm me down. He told me he would take the next flight home to handle the situation. He was scheduled to return in a few days, but he promised to come earlier to address the issues at home. Until then, he advised me to take our son and go to the nearest hotel, so that's what I did. My mother-in-law continued to scream and sob as I packed my sons and my belongings, but I ignored her and left with my son. I couldn't forgive them anymore because they had proven time and again that they weren't truly sorry. I've been staying in the hotel with my son for the past 3 days. My husband is supposed to arrive tomorrow, and we're waiting for him to sort everything out. Not because I depend on him, but because I can't handle everything alone right now. I need to look after my son, who is confused by the sudden change in our situation. A few hours ago, I received my first message from my mother-in-law since I left. It was a text saying she was sorry for how she treated me and that she finally realized I must have taken things the wrong way. She told me that she had just assumed I wouldn't be interested in coming along since my husband wasn't here, so she gave me the list because she thought I'd be at home and not too busy to get everything done before their return. She admitted she had been too quick to assume and that it must have rubbed me the wrong way. She sincerely apologized for it. Then she told me that I had overreacted, as had she, and asked me to let bygones be bygones and forget about it so we could start anew. She even said she considered me no less than her own daughter and that this colossal misunderstanding was hurting her as much as it was hurting me. She really wanted me to come back. Update 1. Okay, so my husband came back a few days ago, and things have been really stressful since then. He drove straight to the hotel from the airport to visit me first and discuss what had happened. I explained everything to him and showed him the text his mother had sent a few days earlier, but I hadn't responded because I suspected she was just trying to placate me again to avoid worsening the situation with her son. I didn't believe her and saw right through it, so I ignored the text. Plus, the advice here suggested not responding, and I think I did the right thing. My husband is furious with his family and has decided to cut them out of his life entirely, and I support that decision. It's harsh, but they deserve it after the nightmare I've endured over the past year. I wish I could be the bigger person and let this go, but I can't and I won't. I kept silent about this for a long time because, deep down, I had received a lot of love and affection from these people in the past, and I had hoped they would change for the better. But they didn't. They just kept disappointing me with their cruel behavior and insincere apologies. Maybe I missed my own parents, and in a way, I had started to consider my in-laws as my family, but they didn't deserve any of the love I showed them, and definitely not my forgiveness. All the love they had shown me in the past was for their daughter-in-law, not for me as an individual. I was wrong to believe they actually cared about me. They cared about my son because he was his father's son, not because of me. It's painful, but at least now I'm not delusional enough to believe things would ever get better. I've decided to sever all ties with this family. My husband and I are planning to leave for Europe within the next week with our son and follow through with our original plan. Our son might find it a bit difficult to adjust to the change, but he's young and will adapt soon enough. I just don't want to stay away from my husband any longer, and neither does he. He can't quit his job because it's very lucrative, but I have no qualms about quitting mine and moving with him. I don't care, to be honest. I don't have any family here, and the ones I considered family turned out to be the worst people I've ever met. So screw them. I'm an accountant, so I'm sure I'll find a job there too. If not, I'll manage somehow, but I just don't see the point of living separately anymore, and neither do I wish to. My husband hasn't told his family about our decision to move and cut ties with them, but we're going to their house tomorrow to pack our clothes and belongings for the move. Tomorrow will hopefully be the last time I have to see them for a while. I'm nervous about meeting them again, but I need to rip this band-aid off and do it soon. My in-laws don't deserve to be in touch with me, my husband, or my son. Update 2. Okay, so my husband and I are back at the hotel. It was a really hectic day because we went back to his parents' house to collect our things. I left my son at a close friend's place because I knew there would be a lot of drama, and I didn't want him to see that. I wish I could say I was proven wrong, but I wasn't. As soon as my husband and I entered the house, my mother-in-law, who had let us in, started acting venomously sweet, and it almost made me sick. This was the same act she'd put on during the first 4 years of my marriage, before I moved in, and she showed her true colors. Even my father-in-law and sister-in-law were on their best behavior, and it wasn't surprising because all they saw was a bunch of dollars and a maid walking in the door when my husband and I came by. That's what they really saw us as, but we weren't falling for this little happy family act anymore. They had the chance to play happy family with us before, but they blew it, and now there are no more chances for them. My husband was very straightforward and blunt with them, telling them that we were just there to collect the things we had left behind the other day, and then we'd be out of there, not just out of their home, but out of their lives. The way they treated me in his absence was disrespectful and absolutely unacceptable, so it was necessary for him to cut them out of his life. There was instant uproar when he said this, followed by several accusations, mostly aimed at me. My husband was labeled ungrateful, arrogant, and spineless for allowing me to turn him against his own family. I was called lazy, selfish, and immoral for trying to break up their family on purpose so I could hog all my husband's attention and money. There was a lot of screaming and shouting, and my voice is actually hoarse now, but at least I got it all out of my system. All the anger I'd been suppressing for the last year just bubbled over today, and by the time we were leaving, my mother-in-law was in tears, still mumbling about how I ruined her life and was now stealing her son from her. My husband seemed very upset, which was natural since he had to put his own family through something so emotionally taxing just for the sake of the family he chose for himself, his wife and son. Since we've been back, my husband has been quiet, and I'm kind of scared of what he might say. I'm hoping he doesn't go soft and suggest giving his family a second chance or something like that, because I really couldn't take that. I think I might leave if he does say that, so I'm really keeping my fingers crossed right now. Update 3. It's been a week since my husband came back, and we've been living in the hotel for a while now. Our flight to Europe is in 4 days, and today my mother-in-law reached out to my husband again to apologize for her behavior the other day. This seems to be her routine: screw up, blame others, then apologize and expect everything to be forgiven. It may have worked on me before, but my husband isn't falling for it. We had a lengthy discussion about how he was feeling after the fight with his family. He looked very upset, and he told me that he wasn't upset about confronting his family, but about feeling like he'd failed to protect his wife and son from something so emotionally torturous. He said that even though he felt a bit bad about cutting them off, that feeling disappeared as soon as they started yelling at me, and he realized what I must have been going through for the past year. He felt like a complete failure as a husband and a father because he had allowed his family to treat me so poorly and had been so oblivious to the truth. That conversation made me realize that I had married the right man. While I had been worried he might go back to his family, here he was, thinking only about me. I felt guilty for even worrying that he'd forgive his family, but I think my feelings were just all over the place at the time. I was feeling paranoid and anxious because of everything that had happened. But after we talked, he put an end to all my worries, and I tried my best to do the same for him. I told him that this wasn't his fault and it had just been a huge misunderstanding. I had been too scared to stand up against his family and was confused because of all the gaslighting and emotional manipulation, which is why I stayed silent and put up with their behavior for so long. That was absolutely not on him. I had been putting them on a pedestal, believing they were kind, decent, and loving people, especially since they had always been good to me before I moved in and when my husband was around. We convinced ourselves that they would be a safe space for me when he wasn't there, but clearly that wasn't the case. The fault lay entirely with his parents, not him. I knew he was nothing like them, so he had nothing to fear. This reassurance helped him feel better. When his mother reached out with another insincere apology, we decided to make it clear that we had no interest in repairing the relationship. What she had done couldn't be mended with a simple apology. After sending that message, we blocked her. A few hours later, my sister-in-law started calling my husband incessantly. While she was arguably the least selfish of the three, she never bothered me directly, nor did she ever speak up for me or offer to help. She was complicit in their behavior, despite my husband paying half of her college tuition, with 1 semester left to go. Eventually, he answered her call and told her that while he would still support her education, that was the end of his financial assistance. He made it clear that he would not be sending any more money to his parents either, so their annual vacations were over. His sister tried to argue, but he silenced her by saying that if she continued to argue, he would cut off her college fund too, leaving her in a difficult position. He told her to watch her tongue. I suspect she must have said something about me, which made him flare up. After a few more minutes of arguing, he finally hung up on her. Right now, he's taking a nap with our son beside him. It's been incredibly stressful for all of us, but I'm grateful we're facing it together as a family. I know he must have had his own struggles living alone, which, while perhaps not as intense as what I went through here, was still challenging. I've had my fair share of difficulties too. I regret ever letting my mother-in-law convince us to stay apart in the first place. I suspect that was her plan all along, to have someone do all the household chores she didn't want to do and couldn't make her daughter do, so I did them. Never mind that I had a full-time job and would be exhausted every evening, or that I also had a 3-year-old to care for. It just makes me wonder how self-centered and cruel some people can be. She could have hired a maid to take care of the housework, but she preferred to save money for her lavish vacations. Well, she can have her vacation now. I'd love to see her enjoy it. Update 4. Hey everyone, our flight is scheduled for tomorrow, and we're all packed up and ready to go. Last night, I learned from one of my husband's cousins that my mother-in-law had been spreading lies about me on Facebook, and even criticizing her own son without any regard. She accused us of being selfish and using her and her husband as free babysitters, claiming that we would leave her alone with our son for hours while we went out for work. She portrayed us as neglectful parents and herself as a burdened lady forced to work even at her age. Not only that, she made up stories about how I mistreated their family members during my stay at their place, supposedly making her and her daughter do all the household chores. She twisted the narrative completely, making it sound like I was the one guilty of the things she'd actually been doing. It's shocking how low someone can go just because they've been cut off from financial support due to their own despicable actions. I can't see how this was supposed to help her case with my husband. He's cutting her off because of her mistreatment towards me, and her response was to create even more drama and stir up trouble. If she thought this would make him reconsider, she's sorely mistaken. His relatives have been reaching out to him non-stop, some to berate him, some to console him, and others to hear his side of the story. The ones who are trying to guilt-trip us and side with my mother-in-law can continue to do so, but my husband is grateful for the ones who took the time to find out the truth. We've also posted our side online to clear things up once and for all. People can choose to believe whatever they want, and we're okay with that because we're about to leave for a long time and won't be back anytime soon. My husband is working on getting his posting extended for a couple more years, so soon enough, we'll be far away from all this drama, and it won't matter anymore. I'm looking forward to what the future holds, and I hope it's filled with good energy for my family and me.